Fear is just one of those things that is always going to hold you back unless you learn how to break the patterns and run headfirst into it. Driven Mofos, welcome back to another episode of The Underestimated Entrepreneur. Let's talk today about what's really holding you back. Now look, I know that you want to do more. You wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you weren't wanting to get more out of yourself, if you weren't wanting to achieve more. It's the reason why you're part of this community of Driven Mofos. That's why I called the community The Driven Mofos, because I know that everyone in here is driven. You're ambitious. You've got bigger goals. You've got bigger dreams. And there's something inside of you that's telling you that you can be doing so much more, achieving so much more. But the question is, why aren't you? Why do you keep fucking it up? Now, here's the truth. The truth is that your past shames create your future failures. And what do I mean by that? Well, I was just driving home today and I was just listening to some podcasts and stuff like that. I was just thinking through why so many people don't really push themselves to the levels to excel. And what I realized was that it's past shame that makes us more afraid of making mistakes in the future. So when we're afraid of making mistakes in the future, then we won't act. Now, most of you are afraid of what other people are going to think. You're afraid of losing what you have. You're afraid that people maybe judge you or criticize you or your family will reject you. You're afraid of losing money. You're afraid of what happens if the business grows bigger. Will you lose staff? You're afraid of not knowing what to do. All of those things come from past shame. Now, if you think about it, when you're at school and you make a mistake in your test or your exam, the teacher might give back a couple of crosses on your page. The other kids look at that and then they judge you. Then you feel ashamed, like there's something wrong with you. That's essentially what shame is. In fact, I'm actually going to Google it and look it up now. I'm going to look up the etymology of shame and see what the actual definition is of that word. But really, what it is we feel bad or we feel this shame on ourselves, which then prevents us from moving forward. So it says here, the Wikipedia definition is, shame is an unpleasant self-conscious emotion often associated with negative self-evaluation, the motivation to quit, and feeling pain or exposure. Yeah, interesting. Now, shame and guilt are definitely two different things. Guilt is normally you breaking your value structure. So you'll feel guilty when someone else has implanted values on you and you're trying to people please them and they project their guilt onto you, but you'll also feel guilty when you break your values. So guilt has a lot to do with value structures. Now, when it comes to shame, I'm actually just going to look up the etymology of this word while we're right here. Now, if anyone doesn't know what etymology is the history and the meaning of the word. Now, I study a lot of this because it gives you a great insight into a lot of the great thinkers throughout history. All right, so what does it say here? A painful feeling of guilt or disgrace, confusion caused by shame, state of being in disgrace. Interesting, so it's disgrace. The word grace means balance. It means a centeredness. So when we're talking about a disgrace, we're talking about breaking away from that centeredness, a dishonor, an insult, low self-esteem or reputation, shameful circumstances. Again, what brings disgrace? So essentially, it's a feeling of being disgraced. Grace is a centeredness. We're breaking away from that centeredness. So that's disgrace. And I guess that creates feelings of disgrace. Let's go back to what I was talking about. When you're at school and you make mistakes, then now somebody comes up, they make you feel ashamed or, again, disgraced by making that mistake. Now, then you get home from school, you tell your parents that maybe you made a mistake, or maybe you get a B or a C or a D, or maybe like me, an E or an F on my report card, and then you get negative feedback. Now, when you're young, babies have this pattern, or young kids have this pattern, where they start to realize that things or problems happen around them, and therefore they seem to be the commonality. So they start blaming themselves. From a very young age, kids blame themselves for things that happen around them because children internalize a lot. They internalize a lot of things. Adults tend to project a lot more. So, like an adult is driving along in a car cuts them off. The adult just yells out and abuses the person in front of him. Very rarely does an adult self-reflect until afterwards. Whereas a child tends to self-reflect immediately. Okay, so there's a lot more data and research coming out about this. It's very interesting. So now as you grow up, you start to blame a lot of the shit that's happening on your life or things that aren't happening in your life on yourself that causes that disgrace or that shame. That shame then paralyzes you or creates future fear because you're worried about it happening again. But the fear response is a survival response. So now you're having this survival response to failing. And it's not a survival response. It's a complete inaccurate assumption of what's going on. Survival is, if I jump across this 800-foot skyscraper, I might die. That's fear. Fear is, if I run across the traffic at peak hour, I might die. Losing money isn't death in most cases. Maybe in third world countries, but not in the first world countries. And in fact, everybody's lost money and we're still here and we're still surviving. So that survival response gets triggered by things like, what will people think of me? I don't have the latest designer clothes. I don't have the latest car, therefore I'm not good enough. Then it triggers the shame response, which then turns into fear. It's a survival response. So when you look at Maslow's hierarchy, down the bottom you have the survival needs: shelter, food, sex and procreation. And then as you start to go up, you start to get this sort of group think where you want to fit in, you want to be part of something. And then when you get to the top of Maslow's hierarchy, you have self-actualization. That is where you get to be the person you want to be. Now, my question to you is, to everyone who's listening, do you make most of your decisions based on fear, which is a survival response? It's the fear of getting kicked out of a group, not fitting in, not being good enough, not being smart enough, not achieving enough. They're all primitive survival responses. Or are you just trying to fit into a group and to have people, to work with people, have people around you and so on? Or are you self-actualizing, which means how do I get the best out of myself? How do I get the best out of others? Which one is it? You have to know. Do you know, only recently I was speaking to someone and they were a business owner and they were stuck. What I noticed straight away was that their main first response was fear. Well, what about if I don't get the money? What about if I can't pay for it? What about if I can't afford it? What about if things fuck up? What about if the economy drops? And because they're living in fear, they're always making fear-based decisions. We now know, based on listening to this podcast before, but even if you just look at basic psychology, it's very well established that the internal world creates the external world. We are more likely to put ourselves in circumstances and situations that we think about often. We are more likely to see things in the external world that validate our own internal thoughts through something called the reticular activating system. So if we're looking for all the red cars, now you probably know this, if you've ever bought a new car, you don't see a lot of them, then now you're looking at buying the new car, you start seeing them everywhere. And then when you buy the car, they're everywhere in the same color, everything. That's the reticular activating system. We see things that we're looking for in life. So if you go to bed at nighttime and you're fear-driven, God, I'm not making enough money, I'm not safe yet, I'm not financially free yet, I'm not where I want to be in life, my relationship isn't working, what do people think of me? Then that's how you go to bed, that's how you're going to wake up. You go to bed at nighttime with 8 hours of fear in your mind, because normally how you go to bed is what happens in your brain when you're asleep. Now, there are some balancing mechanisms and some different theories on dream states and nightmares and things like that. I won't get into that. I've gone into them in other episodes. But essentially, if you go to bed in fear, you will wake up in fear. So in the morning, the alarm goes off and you go, shit, I got to get out of bed. I got to do all this stuff. Those got tos are because you're trapped. If you're trapped, you have to do things. You've got to do things. So I got to get out of bed. I've got to go to work. I've got to get the kids ready. What you're saying is, I'm trapped in everything that I do. I've lost my choice in life. I've lost the ability to make good, clear decisions on what I'm trying to create in my future. And because of that, most people stay in that fear loop. So now their whole day becomes reactive. They're not proactively thinking about their intentions. They're not going into work with an intention in mind. They're not going into, different situations with an intention. I was listening to a guy who follows me who is one of Australia's top Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. I think he's won the ADCC twice or 3 times now, whatever, in Australia. He was saying that in Jiu-Jitsu, the reason why he got so good so quick was that every training session that he went into, he set an intention. He had one intention, and it might just be to get better at one thing during that training session or to really focus on that one move. But he was highly intentional. And because of that, he excelled really rapidly. Instead of just going in there and just training and just having a shot, he was intentional. Now, my question to you is, are you intentional from the moment you wake up to the moment that you go to bed? Are you intentional with your thoughts? Are you thinking about your future mission? Are you thinking about your actions and behaviors that you need to make to achieve that goal? or that future intention or the mission or whatever it is? Are you intentional about living with purpose? My purpose in life is to help people perform better. That's why I do this podcast. In fact, I get told all the time, why do you do a podcast almost every day of the week, Monday to Friday? Now, some days I miss just because I'm backlogged with work. But the key thing is why do I do it every day? Because I'm intentional about living my purpose, and my purpose is to help people perform better. Now, I can only do that in certain ways on free podcasts and shit like that. For a lot of you, you've come and done my events like Thrive Time. If you're a business owner, you'll jump into Business Growth Odyssey. You know, you might have done some of my leadership courses, some of my sales trainings. But my key thing is to help people perform better. I'm not a systems guy. I don't build amazing systems. I build amazing people. That's what I fucking do. That's what I'm born to do. I'm intentional about that every day. When my team come to me and say, I need to build this process and build this system, I say, I'm the wrong guy for that. What do you need help with? I'll work with you. I'll help you with it, but that's not my role. That's not what I do. That's why I hire other people. But I'm very intentional about the way that I operate, because I used to wake up in the morning and I would just freak out and get out of bed. I'm like, shit, I got to make money today. I've got to grow the business. I've got to get new sales. I've got to do this. And the whole day I felt trapped. Then because I was trapped all day, I would notice myself getting stressed out, burnt out, anxious, tired. And then as the afternoon came, all of a sudden my brain kicks in and goes, dude, you've got to reward yourself. Go and eat. Go and do something that's fun. Now, I would only do something that's fun because my day wasn't fun. I'm having fun right now recording this podcast, by the way. But I wasn't having fun because to me, fun wasn't doing the work. Whereas now fun's the work. I enjoy working out. Why? Because working out is fun. Waking up in the morning is fun. You know, I get to wake up next to the woman that I love. I get out of bed. I go have my coffee at my coffee machine. You know, if you follow me on Instagram, you see me getting my morning coffee every morning. Then I start posting on social media. For me, that's fun because again, I'm getting to share, you know, tips, tools, parts of my life that then make people hopefully want to come and work with me or do things with me because they resonate with what I do. So I enjoy social media. I enjoy chatting to people on social media. I enjoy chatting to my community, helping people in my community perform better. Now, because I'm more intentional, I actually see that life is fun. Life never used to be fun because I had these goals and these expectations that I would set, but I would set them because I was fear-driven. Now, most of you are fear-driven. I have people every week in my DMs saying, I just want financial freedom, Mojo. If you want financial freedom, you're fucking trapped by money. That's why you want it. Because we seek things that we don't feel that we have. Right? If you go to the gym, not because you love going to the gym and you love training, you're going there because of fear. Maybe it's the fear that you're fat. Maybe it's the fear that people judge you. Maybe it's the fear that you don't look good enough. Now, yeah, I slip into those moments, but I have to grab myself and pull myself back out. I was just listening to an amazing interview with Conor McGregor, and he was talking about the power of mindset. And he said the number one thing that made him the greatest in history in MMA fighting and one of the greatest fighters in history was that he worked on his mindset, that from a young age, his sister gave him the secret. I think he said he was 15. She gave him the secret and he said, what is this bullshit? And he laughed at it. And then he watched the DVD of The Secret and they were talking about the power of mindset. And that if you don't tap into your mindset, then you can't really control the external environment if you don't have control of your internal environment. And he said he started to believe it, so much so that he became Mystic Mac. If you're into the UFC, you'll hear him called Mystic Mac because he used to make predictions on his fights. And those fights, some of them came true very precisely because he said he imagined it in his mind. Then he said that other times he had slipped, he'd let things slide. And that's where he'd lost fights or he didn't fight in his own style because he started reacting out of fear. They were his words. When I was listening to this interview, I was like, this is so brilliant because it's exactly what I've been teaching for the last 12 to 15 years. That if you do not control your mind will control you. If you don't control your mind, life will control you because you'll be a victim of circumstance instead of someone who wakes up with an intention and controls the way you live and the way you operate. So you have to control your thoughts so that you can control the outer world. You cannot control people around you. You cannot control a lot of the other shit that goes on in the world. But what you can do is you can control what you see. You can control the way you act. You can control the way you think. And maybe there is something there that when you control your thoughts, you're rewarded more in life. Maybe, just maybe. But it seems to be a common thing that people who lose control of their thoughts lose control of their lives. Those who control their mind seem to control their life. They become more disciplined. They become more focused. They become more intentional. They become wiser. They learn. They self-reflect more effectively. So now, if you have past shames, those shames create fear. That fear then drives you into the future. Then you start having future anxieties and future fears because you're worried about what could go wrong instead of what could go right. This is why you have to break free from those past shames. You have to not allow fear to make decisions for you, because if fear keeps making your decisions, you're always going to live in fear. And the moment that you realize that you can control your fear, that's the moment that you can control your life. Anyway, driven mofos, keep kicking ass, take massive action, keep pushing hard towards your goals, and remember that self-actualization in life is the key. Your life is a direct reflection of you. So if you don't change your thoughts, you can't change the way you operate, you can't change your emotions, and you definitely won't change your actions. If you do not do that, you'll just keep getting the same thing that you've always gotten. So it's important to make sure that you realize the power of your own mind. Anyway, driven mofos, have a great day, keep kicking ass, and I look forward to joining me back here once again for another episode of The Underestimated Entrepreneur. Peace out, everybody. Most people waste their life, and I just don't want you to be one of them.